Thank you. Thanks so much. Sorry for the slight delay as we work through some AV difficulties. And Linda definitely sends her regrets for not being able to be here today. So you guys are stuck with me. So I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about what we believe is actually the next great development sandbox. And that's something that is pretty much as personal as I can imagine. It's the DNA, the genetic code, encoded in every single cell of your body. Historically, if you think about where genomics has been, it's been something that's been almost impossible to imagine as a topic of a hackathon, right? Because you would have to go and build a lab, do a deal with LabCorp or Quest, spend literally tens of millions of dollars to even access the data. Yet we are in a world now, and over the past couple of years, what we've been focused on at Helix is making this something that becomes a platform that any software developer with a vision, a dream, two women in a garage can come out with an app in a matter of weeks, similar to what you saw happen in mobile and a lot of other platforms. So if you start out and think about where we are today, personal genomics today is actually extremely early still, though it's 10 years in. The first large-scale consumer genetic test was actually launched by National Geographic about 12 years ago in 2005. And today, of the 12 million people roughly in the world, primarily in the US, who have actually taken a DNA test themselves, the vast majority of these are in ancestry, genealogy. Where did you come from? And if anyone was watching the Olympics last night, you probably saw half a dozen of these advertisements on, right? It's become a fairly mainstream proposition. But if you think about where we're going, and the world that will be here in most of our lifetimes, where people are sequenced essentially at birth and can actually use and control that data through the course of their lifetime for purposes that are both clinically relevant in the health system, serious things like cancer screening, carrier screening, and for things that frankly are very non-clinical, that have personal utility, but perhaps not clinical utility. We obviously are at the very early days of this. We believe there's an inflection point coming, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds for any DNA geeks in the audience, historically, so DNA is actually read in very different ways. And we are now using a technology called next generation sequencing, which is extremely high resolution compared to what's come in the past. And very few people actually recognize this, right? A DNA test seems like a DNA test. You spit at home, what's the difference? Well, there's a huge difference. Historically, until about 2 years ago, if you bought a test at home for typically $99, you were getting genotyped. What that meant was of the 3 billion letters you get from your mom and your dad, or 3 billion base pairs, you were reading about 700,000 of them. Round up, let's call it 1 million of them. And those were all spots, if you think about the genome as a book, where they were predefined typos, right? If you think about your genetic code as a book, we might know on page 75, paragraph 2, sentence 1, word 3, letter 5, there's in 3% of people a typo there. So you would read that single letter, and that's what we were doing for a long time. Well, the world has moved on, and actually in the clinical space, in hospitals and research labs around the world, the vast majority of research now is actually being done specifically on a technology called sequencing. And when you hear about the human genome, or you hear about the exome, which is all the protein coding genes, that's the technology that's now being used. And what that means is you actually read the entire page. You start from the first letter on the page, you read the whole page. And that, of course, means that you can look for typos that were not known before, or what we call de novo mutations. That means that you can look for structural variants, so words that are deleted instead of single letters, punctuation that's missing, sentences that are copied twice, page numbers that are off. You look at a much deeper variety of genetic variation, and that's why if you're doing anything in the healthcare world, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, et cetera, that is where the world has moved, and that is the only responsible way to do this kind of DNA sequencing. So what Helix has built is an assay called Exome Plus, which actually combines what was looked at before, those 700,000-ish data points, plus actually reading every letter of every protein coding region. And believe it or not, that's still actually about 2 to 3% of your genome. The other 97% does not code for proteins. There's not as much research being done, but the world will go there, and we also want to be the first there as well. So a little bit of a deep dive into the wonkiness of DNA, but I think it's very important when you think about what's coming next. In the old days, if anyone here, any entrepreneur wanted to start a business powered by DNA, you would pretty much start on the old approach here. You would build a lab, you might buy instruments, you'd go and find PhDs in genetics, bioinformatics, you'd have to get state-by-state regulatory approval. It's pretty clear why there were 2 or 3 companies that actually tried this, right? And those were all science companies that were specifically focused on genetics. Today, what we've done actually is we spent about 2 years solving all the things in gray there. We now operate the largest clinical exome sequencing lab in the world down in San Diego. And it really has become like AWS for our developers, where they can actually turn on a DNA product by integrating against a Helix API, where Helix actually takes care of sample collection, e-commerce, sequencing, data storage, provides back to the partner just a window of data that's relevant for them to personalize their product. And that's all they have to do to actually start building. So we've actually now seen partners, the fastest first product launch on the platform was about a month and a half, about 6 weeks, where from the time they decided they wanted to do this to launching a product, that's how fast they were to get to market. And the second product launch, once someone had integrated the first time and said, hey, I want to do a product for X, Y, or Z, and then they said, I want to change what window of data I'm looking at. I want to do a different product, right? Obviously faster because you've already integrated against the platform once. That now takes 2 to 3 weeks. So I think this is obviously very, very different from what's come before and something we're tremendously excited by. I do want to be clear, if you've never thought about DNA in your life, it might take longer than 6 weeks because people do spend a little time getting up to speed on the literature and what's going on there. These were partners who really understood the science already, had a product concept in mind, but still, I think before Helix, this would have taken them at least a year to get out to the market. So the ultimate vision here is DNA really should be as common to people as turning on GPS on your phone, right? We've probably all seen this box dozens of times. And as a consumer, you have the choice as to whether or not you want to allow an app on your phone to use the native GPS integration that's been built by essentially Apple and Google, right? That's your choice. When you really think about it, it's a little bit creepy that you allow dozens of apps to know where you are at all times, right? It's a little strange. Yet we all accept that trade-off because it's so darn useful. And that's actually our view of DNA. Is that when DNA becomes useful enough to where you can pull it out of your pocket, choose whether or not you want to enable that app to access your genome, that's when you will see the tipping point here. And I think that what people will make the decision on is really based on the utility of that. So if you think about something like nutrition, and I'll show a couple of examples, or something very simple. Take a fairly simple insight. We don't all metabolize caffeine the same way. I happen to be a fairly fast caffeine metabolizer. Some of you in the audience will be slow caffeine metabolizers. So if we have the same caffeinated drink in the afternoon, how long that stays in our system is going to vary. And we can predict that with very, very high certainty. That happens to be just driven primarily genetically. Well, okay, you get a report, you pay $5. It's kind of interesting, right? But what do you do with that? Well, I think the world that we'll move to is when you're walking by Phil's Coffee in downtown Redwood City, and they've noticed you've stopped going there for 3 weeks, and maybe you're going to the Pete's next door, maybe you actually get pushed an offer, right? If you've linked this up that says, hey, Justin, you're a fast metabolizer. Why not come in and get here's a $1 off coupon because you're walking by. And you're merging in geolocation, mobile apps, e-commerce data, and using DNA as that final piece of the puzzle to engage people, right? There are hundreds, if not thousands of applications like this that clever developers and entrepreneurs can come up with, but it hasn't been possible before because you had to be a DNA expert to even think about this kind of thing. And so I think we will start to see this, and I'll show you some examples of different apps that have already been built that are doing this. This transformation really is going to impact, I believe, every part of our lives. Primarily in this room, if before probably 7 minutes ago, if we had asked you, what do you think of when you say DNA? Most people, even very educated, thoughtful people will say either, well, those ads on TV about my family roots, genealogy, cancer, or we get a lot of CSI, forensics, that kind of world. That's what people think of. People don't tend to realize yet that the way that your genome is inherited from your parents actually influences pretty much every little bit about you. Now, there are pieces where it's a very small fraction of the puzzle, and that's okay, right? It's just a piece of context, an extra piece of personalization. But whether it's how you eat, how you lose weight, how you exercise, what injuries you're prone to, these are all things where there is very solid science today to help personalize and customize those things. And I'll show a couple of examples. This is primarily an excuse for me to put up a cover of a fond childhood memory. I used to love these books. I'm dating myself a little bit. But the way that we think about the user journey and the customer experience, right, is this really has to be the customer in control choosing their own adventure. The average user doesn't engage with something as technical as DNA because they're extremely excited about the science behind it, that we've invested tens of millions of dollars in that. They come because they want to feel in control, they want to feel safe, and they want to use it for something useful. And that's why we formed the company as a platform. Helix takes care of all the backend infrastructure that we talked about, and our partners and our developers, ranging from very large consumer brands, Nat Geo, Mayo Clinic, et cetera, to very scrappy entrepreneurs who started a company to do this, really take advantage of that and build on top of it. For each customer, and I think this point is critical, your data is stored in your own Helix account. No third party ever has access to any piece of your data without your explicit consent, which is typically given when you decide to buy and consume a product. So let's say that you decided to buy a product from National Geographic, telling you about your ancestry. That consent on the product is very clear. By buying this product, you are authorizing National Geographic to access a window of that data to tell you about what you want to know about. And if you're not okay with that, look, you just don't buy the product and you kind of opt out at that point. But Nat Geo doesn't get access to your cancer genes. Nat Geo doesn't get access to your fitness genes. That would be strange. If you come back later and you want to use a product from Mayo Clinic that does tell you about cancer, well, Mayo Clinic's not going to access your genealogy genes. That's also strange, right? So this becomes a journey where the user always retains control and, importantly, can actually revoke access to any product at any time if they choose to do so. And I think our demo on the laptop's not working today. I was going to log in and show you 40 apps in my screen and my ability to essentially revoke access or grant access to any partner for any window of the genome, which I think is something incredibly powerful that hasn't really been done well before. So really, this is the experience that I think we've built and that we're excited to start talking about in the developer community, where the initial purchase from the consumer can be driven by our partners. They can be driven by Helix. We do consumer marketing, and our partners all do as well. We handle, as Helix, all the logistics, the sequencing, the digitization of DNA, really, which is what I think of as the Amazon Web Services backend, right? We want to make genomics as turnkey as turning on a server today. When we started Helix 3 years ago, I think for the first year of the company, the only server we had was a Mac Mini that we bought for some local testing. We now at the lab have some redundancy because if a meteor hits San Diego, I want to make sure that we can protect our customers. But for a long, long time, that's all we had. Everything else was in the cloud. And even today, as we sequence more exomes than anywhere else in the world, actually everything goes straight to cloud, right? So the redundancy you have there needs to be that way, and that has to be the way in genomics as well. This is a data problem. The next thing is the product experience and the ecosystem is driven by our partners. So when you think about using the App Store on your phone, you don't expect every app to be the same way. And my guess is you don't expect an app that tells you about your risk for cancer to work the same way as something that's about caffeine or food. Or I'm wearing a pair of socks where the color is actually customized to my own genome. You don't expect those to be the same experience. And so we really believe the ecosystem is important. And the last thing on that point is the magic actually happens not the first time where we haven't figured out a way to collect DNA information without needing a saliva sample from you. I'd love to figure that out, but we don't have any ideas. Please share if you do. Really, the magic comes the second time. So personal story here. When we launched the ecosystem, it was about 19 apps back in July of last year. I was in New York City, sitting in traffic in the back of a Lyft, pulled out my phone, and the first thing I did actually was make sure the site was still up, and then actually decided to buy a $20 app from one of our partners that actually went deep into what you get from Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens. They've done this really cool mobile experience, which I'll show you in a second. And literally, it authorized it, put my thumb on it, paid $20, and got an email saying your results are ready. Had to download the app, deep link to the App Store, right, because I hadn't installed it yet. And then spent the next 15, 20 minutes of that ride basically going through my own genome. It felt like magic because I had already been sequenced. My data was already in my account, and that was a digital experience. And that is something I think very few people, other than the folks who have experienced Helix to date, have actually ever seen before. And I think when your genome becomes that digital, it actually changes a lot of the consumer psychology around how you use this. And it also changes the pricing that our partners can have, because for the first time, you can have a bite-sized $5 DNA-powered product because you don't actually have to worry about all the infrastructure ahead of it. So where we are today, just a quick snapshot, about 35 products on the platform across a variety of areas. And actually, one of the metrics we track internally is how many new businesses are we supporting that have never been in genomics before, right? Because look, if you're Mayo Clinic and they're a phenomenal partner that's launching soon, they knew about DNA before. They did not come to Helix to build just that part of it. But we have 10 of our kind of roughly 20 partners, about half our partners are actually brand new to this world, and I don't believe could have launched without the infrastructure we've built. So that's something we're proud of and something the team continues to track. We really do care about developers because we believe that the consumer brands and the trust they bring is important. but the innovation is likely to come from folks like all of you in this room. So the first thing we've done as a baby step in this direction is we have teamed up with the Illumina accelerator. Illumina is a publicly traded 30 billion company that essentially powers the whole world of DNA sequencing. They're our largest shareholder and our technology partner. And Illumina has a little accelerator, and we teamed up with them to sponsor a track to bring in entrepreneurs who are interested in building this space. And I think we'll continue to look to do that, to partner with the right accelerators and incubators initially to stimulate this. And we've even helped broker access to capital for some of the early teams, just through some of our own networks or investor networks, et cetera, folks who are excited about this part of it. Really, it's a question, I think, for the developer community. It's very hard today to get discovery and download in something as crowded as the Apple App Store. Here, being one of the first 50, first 100 apps, it really is a different value proposition. Or much earlier market, but much easier to drive discovery and download. So I think it's something that we're very excited about. So a couple of examples, and I actually will probably just show you a few of the mobile apps on my phone. These are all three of these companies, as examples, are teams of less than 10 people. Insightome has now launched 3 apps. Dot1 has launched 5 different products. They're actually a clothing company, so they actually personalize scarves and socks and T-shirts and other things based on your own genetic code, which is actually pretty cool. That was what I got my wife for Christmas. She said, no, nothing in health. I'm not ready for that. And I asked, can I buy you a scarf? And that she said yes to. And Human Code is actually a developer. They formed less than a year ago. They have 2 apps now. And they've done some really novel algorithmic work using machine learning and other artificial intelligence algorithms that they've built to say, if you took 2 genomes and you combined them, what would actually those 2 genomes look like, right? Essentially digitally simulating the process of having a kid. So their first product was called Baby Glimpse. It doesn't have to, and I'll show you the product, it doesn't have to be your spouse or partner. It can be 2 friends. You can connect to as many partners as you want, and led to our head of HR having a lot of stress when people were running around the office yelling out, who wants to make a baby? So it's a fun product. Genomics, though, and this is a different class of product, genomics also is most useful in context. And it's funny probably for, founded a genetics company, et cetera, to say that the genome by itself is not as useful as you would think, but it's true. It's most useful when it's in context with other biomarkers, behavior, outcomes, et cetera. And one of the things we're excited about and proud about is that we have partners, because DNA now becomes on demand for them, that can focus on other pieces of their business and combine DNA with it. So Aravel is actually a health coaching company in Seattle. So they really focus on health coaching and behavior change, but they use genetics as a piece of that to help customize people's plans, right? Because we've all heard, don't smoke, eat broccoli, exercise. It's just really hard to do. But if you actually have a little bit more, hey, you are at higher risk of a cholesterol issue, right? I really want you to focus on red meats. That suddenly becomes personal and can help drive behavior change. Lose It is the second largest food tracking app in the United States behind MyFitnessPal, 35 million downloads or so. And they now, for any of you who use Lose It, right in the app you can decide to unlock and purchase their product called Embody DNA, where they look at 20 different factors that help influence what you eat and how you lose weight. So give you an example here. Saturated fat. It's never good for anyone in terms of heart health, but for some people it actually really influences your BMI. For other people, it doesn't, and we can predict that pretty reliably. So if you're one of the people that it really matters, they will really tell you your saturated fat goal needs to change, and this is what we recommend. And if you're like me, where that actually isn't the group I fall into, listen, I might want to try something else for weight loss specifically, right? Because that's unlikely to make much of a difference. And that just takes some of the frustration away from people who are trying to lose those last 5 pounds. It's a very hard problem to solve. And Everlywell, hard to see on the screen, but they actually do an at-home blood test as well. So they were just on Shark Tank, if anyone watches that. But they do a finger prick for blood markers, and they also do a genetic test through Helix. And if those things line up together, personal example, I have blood markers that suggest that I actually have high reactivity to products containing lactose. My genetics also suggest I have lactose intolerance. I actually phenotypically don't have huge issues with lactose personally, which is fortunate because I love ice cream. But with those two kind of in line, it really does suggest both your blood markers and your genetic markers are suggesting something to watch out for, right? So again, in context, this becomes much more powerful. And lastly, obviously genetics is hugely important for health. And this is very clinically actionable stuff. So a few examples here, whether it's carrier screening, serious conditions like familial hyperlipidemia, where you are a 15x increased risk for heart disease. And we have a bunch of clinical partners that are coming to sort of really provide products in cancer and heart disease. And this is a new area, I think, of preventative screening that will be extremely impactful. So I think what I'll do is I'll showcase just a couple of apps. The laptop isn't working, but I'll spend just 1 minute here and then show you guys a couple of things. With or without Helix, we're at a new era where millions of healthy people are going to be sequenced over the next 5 years. This is inevitable, and these are some of the initiatives that are already happening. So really the question is, as consumers become more and more engaged with their health, as the cost of acquiring data basically goes to zero, and as people participate more broadly, what does that mean for research? And so one of the things that we're excited about doing, and this is a little bit different than the developer focus, is working with institutions like Healthy Nevada to actually engage all of you. And in Nevada right now, in about a month, people will have the opportunity, the first 40,000 people to volunteer, to participate in a research study driven by this nonprofit institute, are going to get to choose an app off Helix for free as a thank you for coming in, right? They expect to then enroll this as quickly as a week because they actually did a pilot program where they enrolled 10,000 people essentially in a weekend. So this scale of research where you're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are voluntarily participating in return for getting access to something like this is, I think, fairly novel and something we're very excited about. And in this case, we're actually combining the genome with the EMR data that this system has. So, look, I think as we go forward, there are going to be hundreds of millions of sequences done. This has a lot of benefits for all of humanity, and we're very excited about it. And I think I have, 2 minutes left. And maybe one of the things I'll do, if okay to switch over.
3 minutes?
3 minutes, perfect, is I'd love to just show you guys a couple of fun products. Unfortunately, the clinical products we have in the ecosystem are not typically mobile apps. That's not mostly the way that consumers tell us they want to interact with a serious health report. But I would love to show you guys just a few examples. So that's my dog. So these are all apps that are Helix powered. For example, something like National Geographic, right? A huge consumer brand. This is a genealogy product, and it is similar to other genealogy products on the market, except they've mobile optimized it. So for example, the Unveil experience here, I think, is extremely novel. If the reception will come in here. So the first time that a user actually gets their DNA results here, they actually have a customized video made for them where, if this will play, hopefully, I'll just show 30 seconds of it. Each user actually has a unique video generated algorithmically that tells them about where they came from. So the Unveil experience here is completely novel because this is not just about the science, it's about the human and consumer experience. So reception here is not great. Maybe you'll have to take my word for it. That buffering bar. Is the Wi-Fi up?
Yeah, the Wi-Fi is.
All right, that's right. I'll skip the video because that's probably the toughest part. But another example of something that people are doing now is the number one thing that users love actually is learning about their Neanderthal ancestry for whatever reason. So you can do something clever these days with mobile technology. Take a selfie right there and immediately share it out, right? So DNA doesn't have to be scary. It can be quite fun. If you want to go super deep into your Neanderthal history, this is the app I told you about. This is my first one. This is an example of in-app purchase. I've actually bought all three of these. They were $30 each, but you don't have to. But you can see this is one app that tells you about all these different parts of yourself that is now, again, in-app purchase. So on the Neanderthal side, this is something I don't think has ever been done before. You can see specifically not just your percentage, but which traits you got from Homo sapiens and which traits you got from Neanderthals, right? So again, very innovative, something that's never been done before to my knowledge. And the last one I'll show you guys just because I mentioned it, and as always a crowd pleaser here. So this is Baby Glimpse, right? This is the team that used their ML algorithms to start modeling out putting two genomes together. And they did it not from a standpoint of disease or from really trying to predict your baby, but looking at different traits, right? Things like your sweet tooth genes, things like your likelihood to be a worrier or a wanderer. And you can actually do this where essentially, I'll match with, I didn't tell them I was doing this, I'll match with Alex, hopefully he doesn't get mad at me. And right away you can see, and you can have as many partners as you want on the app, put it together, and right away you can see, hey, this is where our genealogy comes from, but if you put it together, right, what that means for the combination there. Or if that's genealogy. We happen to both have black hair, so it's very likely that we would combine to have black hair, but not 100%, right? A great education tool for genetics. Eye color, skin tone. sweet and salty, right? What do we each inherit from a taste perspective, and what does that mean if we had a baby? What it would be like? So these are things where honestly developers can figure this stuff out, right? This is applying known techniques to a new data set, but it would not have been possible before if this wasn't something that was very, very digital. So I think we're excited to see the future of this, where this goes. I think there'll be many, many more apps that come out. Then I'm very excited personally to see what becomes the next Pokemon Go, which just surprises us and you could never have predicted. So thank you all for the time. I appreciate the attention.